In this PowerPoint, we're going to look at students considered to be at risk in our schools and also look at how poverty affects students in our classrooms. At-risk students are those who have risk factors which puts them at a higher risk for dropping out of school or failing to acquire the competence needed to function in society. I have here a list of the criteria that the state of Kansas uses to label a student as at risk. Basically, they have to have one or more of these criteria in order to fit the label. The first one and the most common one is that the students are not working at their academic grade level, particularly in the areas of reading or math. The next thing is that they have been retained in a previous grade. So this is one of those things that says a student that's been held back in previous grades is more likely to be at risk of dropping out of school. Next would be high absenteeism, repeated suspensions or expulsions, if the student is homeless, if they are an English language learner, or if they have social emotional needs. Any of these things this is for the state of Kansas, that would classify them as an at-risk student. Schools receive additional funding to supplement and to help students that are considered to be at risk. So the intent of these at-risk programs are to provide additional educational opportunities, which are services offered to at-risk students that are above and beyond what is offered to all students. So these are some of the different programs that are out there. The most common one you hear about for our at-risk students is Title I. There are many different parts and ways that Title I programs are used and the funds are used. Title II is for teacher training. Title III is basically for English language learner students. Title IV is for student support and academic enrichment programs. And Title V is for rural school districts. So just know that there are different ways, but there is funding for those at-risk students as individuals that come from these different programs. Now, some of the programs are directly to working one-on-one with students, but some of these programs could also be school-wide. If you have a large number of students that are considered to be at risk, then that school could be labeled as an at-risk school, and funds could possibly, if it is a block grant, if you think back to what we talked about in previous chapters, a block grant could be used for other students as well. So in that case, then those funds could be used school-wide and for enrichment programs for the entire school instead of just those particular students that are labeled at risk. One of the biggest influences and the biggest negative influence of students in our classrooms are those that are living in poverty. Those living in poverty are more likely to be at the heart of our school's challenges than anything else. So, when we're talking about students living in poverty, they're dealing with a lot of different things in their lives. The things you most commonly would see in a classroom are that they are left out because of the condition of their clothing, or the few clothes that they own, or the fact that their clothes are dirty, not clean, holes in their clothing. They might feel left out because they can't bring a present for the teacher for different holidays or whatever. They don't have money to pay for a field trip. They don't have transportation to get maybe to the library if they need to go research something, whatever it might be. They don't have internet service at home. Those sorts of things that put them and make them feel left out, not a part of the rest of the group. Those are the most common things that you would see in your classroom. Now I want you to think about poverty, though, also has some long-term damage effects on many of our students. It puts them at higher risk for developmental delays, dropping out of school, teenage bursts, and higher incidence of child abuse or neglect in those homes. So there are a lot of issues that these students are facing that we need to consider when we are dealing with these students. So when we're dealing with all of our students, we need to keep in mind Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and hopefully you can recall this from some of your previous classes that you have hopefully talked about some of these things. But with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have to start at the bottom of this pyramid. And basically it says that we have to have our physiological needs met first. Do we have food, water, shelter, clothing? Those physical needs have to be met. Then we can say, okay, do we have safety and security? Do we feel like there's a stable home, a stable family for these kids to go to? So, and then you can move your way up from there in this hierarchy of needs. Students that are living in poverty are very likely dealing with issues of trying to meet those physical needs at the very base of this hierarchy. They're worried about where their next meal is going to come from. Their only meal might be when they're at school. And so if they come to us hungry, tired because they didn't have a bed to sleep in, or maybe even a home to sleep in, they're worried about those things. They really aren't going to be concerned about answering our math problems or reading that social studies article that you want them to deal with. They have basic survival things that they have on their mind. And so we always need to keep that in mind as a teacher and make sure that we do what we can to find the help that those students or families need in order to meet those basic needs first. Our book talks about the fact that these kids often lack self-esteem, but if you look at this hierarchy, before we can ever build their self-esteem, we've got to meet these other needs first. Make sure that they are getting the food, shelter, clothing that they need. And then we can help work on the safety and security. In the classroom, we can provide safety and security for them, provide them that stability that they don't have elsewhere. We can also, which kind of ties in with love and belonging, creating that community of family or learners in our classroom where they feel like they do are loved and belong. And if we can do those things, then we start to build that self-esteem. But we've got to start at the bottom and work our way up before we can really ask them to dive into the curriculums that we're trying to teach them. That might be the last thing on their mind. Another thing that our book talks about, it kind of points out that maybe something we need to keep in mind is communication with these families can be a challenge. If they, are moving a lot, if they don't have a stable home, may not have telephones, internet service, that sort of thing, how can we reach those families, those parents, keep them involved in their students' academic learning, as well as just staying in touch with them? And so finding those things can be a challenge, and we need to make sure we continue to work at and find the best way to do that for each individual family. And that's going to change, and it's going to be different. And I think the key is getting to know each one of those students and what do we need to do for that individual and what works best for them in order to meet their needs.